William K. Mayo from Hamilton County, Tennessee, enlisted here at Fort Oglethorpe.
Louis Varnell always tells a good story. He told me this one for the first time back in 2016. Here's a short clip from that telling. He owns a history company in Fort Oglethorpe. He told us the story of William K. Mayo.
Goes into the Army and is apparently quite a soldier.
He said someone brought him Staff Sergeant Mayo's Air Medal from World War II.
This was not one that we found. This was found at the Catoosa County landfill.
And then Louis did what Louis does. He went to work researching the story of Staff Sergeant William K. Mayo from Hamilton County, Tennessee. Here's more of that clip from 2016.
But also folded up in this box is a letter that is letting William Mayo know that he has been selected for officer candidate training as an aviation cadet.
Saved from the county dump. It's called the Air Medal. It was created in World War II and is awarded for meritorious achievement during a flight. It was then sold to an antique dealer, then to another person, and that person brought it to Louis.
And once we got it, we realized, yeah, this is not just a medal, this is a story.
On this episode, Louis Varnell of the History Company in Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, tells us all about World War II soldier William Mayo and much, much more. My name is Josh Roe, and this is Tomorrowtown, Tennessee.
We know that he was quite a soldier because he is promoted very quickly in some of the paperwork we're able to see.
Again, that conversation was back in 2016. Well, I saw Louis again a few years later, and he said he had much more to tell me about William K. Mayo. This conversation is from a few months ago.
It turns out that William Mayo is the radio operator on a C-47 aircraft. It was the lead aircraft dropping paratroopers from the 82nd into Italy.
Back to 2016.
Their aircraft was shot down not long after they had dropped a stick of paratroopers on Sicily. The co-pilot of that particular aircraft was Captain Charles Dobbins, for whom Dobbins Air Force Base ultimately is named down in Atlanta, and also as a passenger is the Assistant Division Commander of the 82nd Airborne.
And back again to 2026.
Unfortunately, no one told the United States Navy that they would be flying over, and so in a pretty tremendous friendly fire incident, a lot of those aircraft, including Mayo's, were shot down. We did the story just trying to get any information on Mayo that we could because we knew he was from Chattanooga.
A piece of history, once thrown away, but now has a permanent home.
People come to the shop and they say, well, now, is that for sale? Oh, no, that's not for sale. You know, I've got a ton of other things that are for sale that I can't identify. You can buy those. This goes in a case with a story.
We were hoping someone would get in touch with us and nothing came of it. But then 5 years later, a lady called me from Knoxville, and basically the story that had been run was now online as a text article. They had found it, and she said, "Do you want some information on William Mayo? Do you still need a photo?" And I said, "Yes, we do. I've not been able to find anything." And she said, "Well, my mother-in-law just passed away at 98 years old, and when we went through her wallet, Mayo's photograph and the newspaper article about him going missing were both in there." And so the story on that is that she had been Mayo's high school sweetheart. Mayo enlisted here at Fort Oglethorpe in, if I remember right, January of 1942. She enlisted here at Fort Oglethorpe in the WACs in February. And then when he gets killed, when he's reported missing, she is so emotionally devastated that the Army discharged her, sent her home to Chattanooga. Her sister had a job at Oak Ridge and basically convinced her to come up there and, you've got to get out of the house. So she goes to Oak Ridge. She ends up in, I think, 1947, meeting another serviceman. They end up getting married. She has a tremendous life. She, kids, grandkids, great-grandkids, did all these things. But still in all, till the day she died, she carried William Mayo's photograph with her. And that we thought brought us full circle on that story. And then we had a friend of mine, now he's a friend, but he had come in here from Fort Campbell where he's stationed. He'd found the store online. was talking to a friend of mine. He said, hey, I brought a grouping to show you guys what I collect. And so I hear him behind me talking, and he said, yeah, I've got this Air Medal and Purple Heart posthumous awards to a guy named Don Armstrong, who was the navigator on the lead aircraft of Operation Husky. And I stood there for a minute. He said, I'm trying to research the crew. I said, well, the radio operator is William Mayo. And he said, how do you know that? And I said, I've got Mayo in the back. Mm-hmm. And so once he and I became friends, he contacted me one day and he's like, hey man, I've really been thinking about this. Those two men died together. They should be back together in the museum. And so we were able to work a deal. And so now we have William Mayo and Don Armstrong side by side, just like they would have been in the nose of that aircraft when they were shot down.
So the picture of the young woman over here by Mayo, is that the girlfriend
yes.
from way back?
Clara.
Clara.
Her name was Clara Dykes. And that, of course, that was not her married name, but that was her name at the time. But yeah, she came down here and enlisted in the WACs, and they were both serving.
And so, where'd they grow up? Where did they meet again?
They're both from Chattanooga.
From Chattanooga.
Yeah, they were high school sweethearts in Chattanooga.
And what did the family tell you? Like they when they found the picture, they didn't know who this person was?
They didn't really know very much about it. She had said a few times that she had had a boyfriend who was killed in the war. So she wasn't, she didn't keep that hidden, but it was definitely something that affected her for her entire life, even though she did move on like you have to, and she has a very full life. She never forgot him.
Think about that, though. For it to impact you to the point of like you carry his picture on you for the rest of your life. I mean, that's a significant impact in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. And see, several of the people I have here at the museum who were killed in action, their wives never remarried. Mm-hmm. I've got one, Jim McMillan, out front, who dies on Iwo Jima. His wife never remarries. The one that's the Marine Corsair pilot here, his wife, when he died in action, they sent her back his footlocker, which she put in the attic and never opened. Mm. And when I met her, she was telling me that story, and she said, but I just leave it there. I don't want my kids and my husband to think that I've pined away for Jimmy all these years. But and it was probably 5-6 years later, I had moved twice, but she'd kept my phone number, and she called me and said, Mr. Varnell, my husband has passed away, and I need to do something with Jimmy's items. And so we drove to Memphis. She had gone through it right before we got it to take any personal letters or anything out of it. But she gave us the footlocker, and she told me, she said, Jimmy was such a phenomenal person. He was so full of life. And she said, what I'm afraid of is when I'm gone, no one will know that Jimmy lived. And so that was really one of the first artifacts, large-scale artifacts, that we got when we first started out.
If we don't tell these stories that matter, that are impactful, that these people sacrifice lives, parts of their lives to save the world, literally save the world. And can you just speak to that, like the significance that it has for you and why that matters to you? Just keeping these stories alive?
Well, so I think, and this is where somebody asked me why we have a museum, and it is 100% because growing up and seeing those scars on my dad's leg, and him finally kind of telling me he'd been wounded badly in the war, and I got very interested in World War II history, and all of his friends were veterans. And so I would just sit and listen to them talk. And for whatever reason, I was always a story guy. And when I taught history, I always brought a lot of stories into it as well. But that was it. Initially, it was just going to be, you know what? If I have this business, I'm going to tell my dad's story. And then it became, well, here's another story. And this guy, this is a good story. And this woman who served, this is a good story. And it turned into this, which is just basically a big collection of stories and artifacts. You have artifacts, and artifacts are neat. But there's only so far you can go with just an artifact unless you have a name, you have a face, you have a story with it. A helmet is a helmet is a helmet is a helmet, unless you've got the guy's story. We have a German helmet in here that has been painted orange, And my German helmet collector buddies, I want to strip the paint off of it. But written across the top, it says, Der Vaterland ist kaputt, helped kaputt by Private Scruggs, 1942-45. That's the only helmet on the entire planet that says that. That is such an awesome story. We strip the paint off, it's just another helmet.
Yeah. So walk me through all of the items. What's in the case?
Okay. So we have William Mayo's air medal, and we have an enlargement of the article showing where he had been missing that was printed in the Chattanooga papers. Of course, his photograph that they sent us. And then the picture of Clara when she had enlisted. And the other items in here are Don Armstrong's, so his air medal and there's air medal and Purple Heart. The rest of the items were put together to add to the display, but the two medals are his. And then there's a photograph of him right there.
When you look at William and Clara in their pictures, like you can kind of almost feel them. You know what I mean? Like it's you can see that young couple. Like it's almost like somebody you know almost when it brings it to life. Can you speak to that? Just kind of like how a few things, pictures and whatnot, you really get a sense of these people.
Yeah, I've told people it's kind of weird sounding, I guess, especially when it's someone who passed away. You never met them. But when you research them and you get into where the unit was and you can pull their files and look at things like that and maybe see a letter from their mother or something, you do end up feeling like you kind of know that person to some degree. You have some connection with them. And once that connection's made for me, well then, we have to tell that story.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing. I mean, I guess everybody has their thing. That kind of became mine, was telling stories.
Yeah.
Well, I'll use as an example, the Marine that we have in this case, Roy G. Carbine. Now, Carbine goes in pre-World War II, serves all the way through, stays in, ends up being a combat correspondent in Korea, finally ends up retiring, goes into the newspaper business because obviously he'd been a PAO, so that made sense. And I found an article written by a guy who had been on the Johnson City paper with Roy Carbine. Of course, Roy Carbine was an older guy. He was just starting his career. But Carbine, and he wrote this in the article because he was talking about his journey to faith and his overcoming his alcoholism and things like that. And Roy Carbine basically said to him, what do you believe? And what's going to happen to you? And why are you doing these things? And he said at the time, he didn't want to hear it, but it had always stuck with him. So just from that little snippet, you get the idea that Roy Carbine was a man of principle and a man who cared about his fellow man enough to broach that difficult topic. I mean, I just think that was a great story to find out on him.
You can go see Louis Varnell in his museum at the History Company at 2949 Lafayette Road in Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia. And a big thank you to you for listening to Morrowtown, Tennessee. This podcast is a production of News Channel 9, Fox Chattanooga, and Sinclair Broadcast Group Chattanooga. I hope you join me again real soon.